Tonight, the messy end. 1 year after the last U.S. boots left the ground in Afghanistan. The U.S. now restricted to over-the-horizon drone strikes to take out terrorists. Al-Qaeda's commander, a key plotter in the 9/11 attacks, obliterated.
No matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out.
Even as the one-time haven for Osama bin Laden is now a sanctuary for a new generation of terror. We take a look back at the plight of Christians, refugees, and the Afghan people.
We are just trying to talk to them, speak to them every day, just to calm them down.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Tonight, a special edition of the show, 1 year after the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Matt Gelka. On this 1 year anniversary since the U.S. exit from the longest war, we look back at a year since the U.S. ended its on-the-ground combat engagement in Afghanistan. Now, the U.S. is relying on drone attacks and surveillance from afar to continue fighting the war on terror. This month, scoring a win against Al-Qaeda's commander, that drone strike also serving to highlight the Taliban's acceptance, if not embrace, of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas has the latest on the situation in the region.
Florida Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, a decorated former Special Forces officer who led multiple combat tours to Afghanistan, tells CBN News that a year after the Taliban takeover, the country is now a sanctuary for terrorists.
The intelligence community has been very clear to those of us on the Armed Services Committee that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are rebuilding and they fully intend to attack the West again.
Afghan watchers say the Taliban achieved what Osama bin Laden dreamed of and ISIS wished for, a full-fledged caliphate with the powers of the state.
With the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, these groups have been welcomed with open arms, even if quietly, and we've seen them reorganizing their efforts in Afghanistan.
Congressman Waltz says a year in, the consequences of America basically giving Afghanistan to the Taliban has meant a huge boost to militant Islamists everywhere.
I can share with you that the United Nations and their intelligence analysis shows that 10 to 15,000 foreign fighters are now gravitating back into Afghanistan.
In June, CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla revealed U.S. intelligence that terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda are already building training camps inside the country.
Al-Qaeda may or may not choose to launch attacks against the U.S., but the fact that it has the capacity, that it has the safe haven to do so, that is what frightens me.
Indications are the Al-Qaeda-Taliban relationship is only getting stronger, as evidence that longtime Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri lived in a posh Kabul neighborhood until the August 2nd U.S. drone strike killed him at the safe house.
The United Nations was reporting just weeks prior that top Al-Qaeda leaders were providing strategic guidance to the Taliban. And lo and behold, we kill Zawahiri in Kabul. I think this tells us everything we need to know about that Taliban-Al-Qaeda relationship.
While Taliban fighters took to the streets this week celebrating the 1 year anniversary of their takeover, most Afghans stayed home, dismayed at the crippling and harsh conditions under the Taliban's Islamic rule. It's been a year since Afghan girls set foot in a classroom. Sordaba Nazan decided to run informal classes at this undisclosed home in Kabul.
The Taliban, with its extreme ideology that they have against women, have not changed. They are the same Taliban of 20 years ago. But we can't be the women of 20 years ago. We have to continue our struggle with the pen and our voices.
Women are banned from government jobs, forbidden to travel alone, and have been ordered to cover up.
Afghanistan as a whole is being denied the benefit of women and girls' contribution to society.
Meanwhile, the country's economy is in tatters, and 97% of the population has fallen into poverty, with reports of widespread starvation.
On the one hand, the economic situation is difficult. On the other hand, security situation is getting worse day by day. We still witness the same explosions and suicide attacks we used to witness in the past.
A year under Taliban rule, and there's already talk of Afghanistan becoming a failed state.
The future is very bleak. We see this as a precipice, and we are driving towards the precipice without even a safety belt on.
George Thomas, CBN News.
After the withdrawal, a major victory in the U.S. war on terror. President Biden ordering a secret drone attack targeting and killing the leader of al-Qaeda, said to be hiding in plain sight in Afghanistan. The death of Osama bin Laden's successor almost a year after the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from the country. Brody Carter has more on the operation that took out al-Qaeda's #1.
Nearly 3,000 people were murdered in the terror attacks on 9/11. 21 years later, the U.S. government is still hunting those responsible.
No matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out.
Sunday, the man who led al-Qaeda following Osama bin Laden's death in 2011 died in a drone strike ordered by President Biden.
He made videos, including in recent weeks, calling for his followers to attack the United States and our allies. Now, justice has been delivered.
One of the fascinating things about Ayman al-Zawahiri is that he hails from one of the most prominent families in Egypt. As a matter of fact, before he devoted his life to terrorism, he worked for years as a medical doctor and even worked with children.
Eric Stakelbeck, terror analyst and host of The Watchmen, says al-Zawahiri then transitioned to the world of jihad. His fingerprints were on attacks including the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole, which killed 17 sailors, and bombing U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing more than 200 and wounding thousands. This strike inside Afghanistan comes a year after the chaotic U.S. retreat from the country.
My fellow Americans, the war in Afghanistan is now over.
Still, analysts like Stakelbeck worry our absence left a vacuum likely filled by various terror groups.
The terror threat is not over. Because of that hasty withdrawal, will once again become a terror safe haven is very real.
As U.S. intelligence keeps a watchful eye on the region, many wonder what's next.
Who is the successor to Ayman al-Zawahiri? Who is the next jihadi to lead al-Qaeda? And right now, the prime candidate appears to be a guy by the name of Saif al-Adel. Now, like Zawahiri, he is an Egyptian, but the interesting wrinkle here is that he currently lives in Iran.
For more analysis on what the American military's increasing reliance on drone attacks means for the U.S. and the fight against terror, CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burke spoke with foreign policy expert Michael O'Hanlon.
Here with us now is Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow with the Brookings Institution. Michael, thanks for joining us tonight on Faith Nation. The U.S. drone killing of bin Laden's successor involved no U.S. boots on the ground. Does this strike prove the U.S. is capable of countering terrorism nearly a year after the chaotic and messy U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan?
You know, this is going to be a big question. Certainly, we have a lot of things we can do even from long distance, and it's impressive what our intelligence community has been able to accomplish here. And I think it's remarkable. But of course, it did take a lot of very careful scrutiny. And it happened after Zawahiri decided he could safely relocate to Kabul because the U.S. military was no longer there. So you can read this either way as to whether it proves we can handle counterterrorism from long distance, or whether it proves that trying to do so introduces new risks. It's probably a little bit of both. Certainly in the aftermath of this killing of this terrible terrorist, I think President Biden's overall strategy will look better for the moment. And I think there is some vindication of the idea that we can do some things from long range. But you can't really develop new intelligence networks from long range. And so we're vulnerable to somebody who we haven't heard of and don't know as well, somehow becoming important in Kabul or elsewhere in Afghanistan. And we won't have the same kind of ability to figure out who that person might be and hone in on them. So, yes, in the short term, it certainly would seem to be a vindication of the idea that you can do counterterrorism from long range. But that was for this one particular case. I don't like to draw broad conclusions from one case.
All right. Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, Afghan refugees are resettling in the United States. How local churches are helping. Afghan refugees are resettling in the United States. Local churches across the country are leading the way to be among the first to welcome and help them. CBN Senior National Affairs correspondent Heather Sells reports from Fort Worth, Texas, on these faith communities that are welcoming the stranger.
I'm not a very good athlete.
Refugees have been learning to speak English at Southcliff Baptist for 20 years. Early on, Bosnians learned a new language. Many of today's students come from a different war-torn land. Texas is preparing to receive more than 4,000 refugees from Afghanistan, and churches here have become part of the front lines in welcoming them.
Southcliff has always been there for the refugees.
Helmand Wardock and his family arrived 6 years ago. They're thriving in large part due to Southcliff. In addition to English classes, the church provides community and a safety net for those struggling to survive. After a 6-month honeymoon, their government housing and food allowance runs out.
What happens after is like the refugees mostly they are left by their own. So that's where the churches such as Southcliff, they come into action.
Across North Texas, hundreds of church volunteers have signed up and trained to help resettle those who fled Afghanistan. Northwood Church is sponsoring 3 families.
We're actually going to acquire 3 apartments and put those families up for 12 months.
April Hale volunteered to organize clothing needs after following Afghanistan on the news.
I found myself at home watching everything unfold, feeling helpless, and just wishing that I could find something to do to help them. When I found out that we were going to be able to help some families through our church, there it is. You know, that's my answer.
Her attitude may mark a shift in evangelical thinking towards refugees. During the Trump administration, the U.S. slashed the numbers allowed in to 15,000. That forced some faith-based agencies like World Relief to lay off staff and close offices. A 2018 Pew poll showing declining support for refugees among white evangelicals led many to wonder if the church was losing its vision for ministry. Now, the Biden administration plans to admit more refugees, and resettlement agencies are ramping back up. They're rehiring, recruiting volunteers, and stocking supplies. Next year, World Relief in North Texas will help resettle 4 times the number it did last year.
We are quickly expanding our offices, our staff.
Northwood pastor and World Relief partner Bob Roberts says he's seen an overwhelming response.
I think there's a shift that's taking place. We're coming back to who we are.
What's helped? A host of Christians with ties to ministries in Afghanistan, plus veterans.
The right response is we've been in the war. We have marginalized people to use them in the war in good conscience. We can't walk away from those people. That's not American.
Southcliff pastor Stu Kokenauer says refugees have changed his church.
We have persecuted Christians in this church that are just so grateful to be in a nation where they can worship Jesus without fear of the army busting in.
And churches are changing lives. Zahir, a former U.S. interpreter, fled Afghanistan in August with his wife and son.
Agency, they are providing, everything. Like they provide, like in the first, from the first day till now.
A church member co-signed for his apartment, and he's now looking for a job, any job. Wardock, meanwhile, is trying to help his 20 family members who worked with the U.S. government but can't get out of the country.
So we are just trying to talk to them, speak to them every day, just to calm them down.
As these refugees rebuild their lives here and try to help loved ones back home, they face plenty of risk and unknowns. One certainty, however, is the growing number of churches committed to helping them navigate a new culture while pointing them to the love of Christ. Reporting in North Texas, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Afghanistan joins the worst offenders of religious freedom around the world. Why there's much more work to be done when we come back. After CBN News covered a major push by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom to get the State Department to add Afghanistan to the list of worst religious freedom violators, the department put Afghanistan on the list this summer in its report on international religious freedom. Afghanistan now joining the likes of China and Russia as just some of the nations highlighted as being among the worst offenders of religious freedom around the globe. Here's CBN News' White House correspondent Abigail Robertson.
This year's release opened on a positive note, highlighting certain progress worldwide in the expansion of religious freedom, like Iraq's first invitation to the Pope to visit the country.
This report is about spreading that kind of progress to more parts of the world.
Secretary of State Blinken sees the impact of the historic papal visit as profound.
He sent a message not only to Iraqis, but to the whole world that Islam and other religions can sit together peacefully.
Still, the report reveals much work to be done, calling out many repeat offenders like China for religious freedom violations.
China continues its genocide and repression of predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and other religious minority groups. Since April 2017, more than 1 million Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and others have been detained in internment camps in Xinjiang.
International Religious Freedom Ambassador Rashad Hussain claims Russia has doubled down on violations since invading Ukraine in March.
President Putin sought to justify the unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine through the blatantly false pretext of denazification.
The report also highlighted how religious freedom has deteriorated since the Taliban regained control of Afghanistan in 2021.
The Taliban regime and rival militant group ISIS-K have detained, intimidated, threatened, and attacked members of religious minority communities.
Hussain says thanks to technology and social media, the U.S. has more allies helping combat religious freedom violators than ever before.
We have mechanisms to shed light on abuses taking place, and we have the means to hold bad actors accountable.
Secretary Blinken and Ambassador Hussain both emphasized America's commitment to protecting and advancing religious freedom rights around the world and urged foreign governments to speak out and protect the most vulnerable. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Afghanistan is home to a tiny minority of Christians, their plight and their inspiring resilience. After this. Afghanistan's tiny Christian community is facing elimination. Some leaders have already disappeared. Others fear death or that their wives and daughters will be taken as sex slaves. Despite those very real threats, Afghan Christians say they'll keep living for Jesus. George Thomas spoke with an underground church leader about the perseverance in the face of life under the Taliban.
Within hours of capturing Herat, the terror group's fighters were out patrolling streets trying to convince residents of Afghanistan's third largest city that life would soon return normal.
Business will continue as normal, and people are happy with us. And with our services, they will be happier.
Hamid has serious doubts about those claims.
Right now, we fear elimination. The Taliban are going to eliminate the Christian population of Afghanistan.
Hamid, not his real name, is among thousands of Afghans who've come to faith in Jesus Christ over the past 2 decades. We've concealed his identity for safety.
There weren't a lot of Christians 20 years ago during the Taliban time, But today, we are talking about 5,000 to 8,000 local Christians, and they live all over Afghanistan.
In an exclusive interview from an undisclosed location, Hamid told CBN News he's very concerned about the future of Afghanistan's tiny Christian community.
We know a Christian believer who we've been working with in the north. He's a leader, and we've lost contact with him because his city has fallen to the Taliban. There are 3 other cities that we have lost contact with our Christian believers.
According to Open Doors, Afghanistan is the second most dangerous place to be a Christian in the world, just behind North Korea. The majority of the Christians here converted from Islam.
Some of the believers are known in their communities. People know that they converted from Islam to Christianity, and they are considered apostates, and the penalty for that is death. The Taliban are famous for carrying out that punishment.
Taliban fighters are reportedly now going door to door, forcing families to give up their daughters, some as young as 12, to be sex slaves for their men.
I have 4 sisters that are single. They are at home, and they are worried about this.
David, a foreign national, has worked in Afghanistan for the past 3 decades. We've taken similar precautions to protect his identity. He saw the Taliban's brutality up close while living in Kabul during its last reign. Now comes fear of a return to the days of regular executions, flogging, stoning to death, and hand-chopping.
They have a strict interpretation of Islamic law, not only from the Quran, but also from what they call hadiths, which are traditions, sayings, and practical applications of Islamic law. They take these literally.
Despite these threats, David says there's a hunger among Afghans like never before to know God in an intimate way.
People are really seeking in their heart for peace, seeking for a true relationship with God, for meaning in life, and for an understanding of who is this God.
Hamid is asking people around the world to pray for his country during these uncertain times.
The Christian community in Afghanistan is strong. They are trusting Jesus. They are working with Jesus despite the potential of being eliminated by the Taliban.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Very important reporting from George Thomas there. And that's going to do it for us on this special edition of Faith Nation. Have a great night, everybody.